All right, everyone. What we've been doing in this section is going through these farm programs. The last lecture, we spent time on the PLC program. The first thing we talked about, though, is eligibility, and that's having the owning or operating a farm that has base acres, which will have an associated yield. You use those yields, and you use the number of acres and the crop they're assigned to calculate payments when they're triggered. It was always that national marketing year average price for price loss coverage, PLC. And today we'll finish up ARC, which is the other major program. And these are the heart of commodity support in the Farm Bill, ARC and PLC. So I'll first go through ARC, and then we'll spend some time talking about something so you understand the details, and then we'll spend some time answering questions and kind of finishing up. There's some general points to make. So county ARC is what we're going to talk about. What they do is it creates a county revenue guarantee, and if actual county revenue falls below that guarantee, there are payments triggered. And so instead of a national marketing year average price floor, what you have for PLC, you have a county level revenue floor. And when we do the crop insurance, you're going to see that's a very common thing now, is these revenue floors as opposed to price floors. So there's a complicated process to calculate the guarantee, or for the county level guarantee. They create something called the benchmark, and then they take 86% of it. So county benchmark is the 5-year average of county yield and the 5-year average of price. That's that national price, and the 5-year average is the Olympic average. They throw out the high and they throw out the low, and then you take the average of the final 3 in this case, because there's 5 of them. Same thing for the prices. But they put floors on things. So like the effective reference price, we went through that last time, there's a different price. They try to raise it up a little bit. So like if the national price is 356, they actually use the PLC price floor, the effective price of 370 when they do their calculations and stuff like that. And the same thing with yields. County yields, each county has something called the T yield, which is like the absolute lowest yield that's kind of recognized as an average yield for the county. And that's unusual. It's rarely triggered up here in the north, these T yields. It's in areas that are down south usually that have these T yields. In Texas and some of those areas, it's really dry. So you get that guarantee is you calculate that benchmark yield times the county benchmark, which is yield times price. Then you take 86% of it. And then it's pretty simple after that. If the actual revenue is below that guarantee, you trigger a payment. And what's that guarantee? Or the county guarantee minus actual county revenue, I should say. What's the actual revenue? It's the national marketing year price, marketing year average price for that year, times the county average yield. And so you can see there's just the same yields, the same prices again. It's just county yields and national marketing average price. And then you get 85% of that. So you take once you figure out that payment rate, you just take it times the base acres and times 85%. So this is the same formula used for PLC, except you have to put the yields in there, the payment yields times the price shortage. This is the revenue shortage. So it's very similar. But the key is that it's a revenue floor at the county level, and you calculate it. It's kind of a complicated formula to calculate the revenue guarantee, and I tell farmers it's really not worth worrying about it too much. It's just using the Olympic averaging the prices and yields. But from your perspective, it's simply there's some kind of revenue guarantee. There's a process for calculating it, but you don't need to worry about how it's calculated. Just know it uses prices and yields and national prices and county yields. And so that there's a guarantee, and if the actual falls below the guarantee, you trigger payments. It's the same 85% rule in there as well. There is a maximum payout as well. So like if the price really collapsed at the national level, or you're a county that has a really low yield for some reason, you don't get these giant payments. And what they do is they take 10% of the county guarantee. So I'm going back a slide. Damn it. Sorry about that. It keeps rolling around here. I gotta use the keyboard. That's just the problem. So essentially, you go back to this county guarantee, you can get, that's the maximum payout is 10%. In the very beginning of ARC, the first few years it was available, counties did hit that maximum payout. And so it did matter, but we're not in the payment time right now. So, but it does sometimes bind, and they only pay out 10% of the county guarantee. or county benchmark. So here's an example. We got, this is for 2021. I just put the numbers for Dane County. So there's the crop year on the side, 2019 through 2015, in the first column. The second column is the county yield for Dane County. So you can see 204.93, 218.41, et cetera. And then that column on the far right is the national price, the national marketing average price. So then I have the double cross out for the high and the low. So the 2018 had 218, that's dropped as the high yield. The 195 is a low yield. And so you take the average of the remaining three. Same thing with the price, throw out the high and the low. And now you take the Olympic average of the yield down the bottom there. It's 199.47. Olympic average of price. Because all these three prices are below the 370, that there's a price floor of 370. So all those get lifted up to the new price floor of 370. Well, the average of 370, 370, and 370 is 370. So there's your benchmark. 370 times 199.47. There's the county benchmark, $738.04. County guarantee is 86% of that, or $634.71. And the maximum payout is $73.80 per base acre. So you get a sense of that. That's Dane County. And this was in 2021. You don't have 2020 yields because you're signing up for this now between October and March of the year, and the county average yields aren't even available yet for the current year. And so there's always a 1 year lag in there. And so like this is for 2021, there's no 2020 yield yet. And so they just don't have the data. The same with the price. There's no 2020 price either, because you have to wait till the marketing year ends, which ends in August of 2021 is when the 2020 marketing year ends. So it's there's a big lag in there. So we went through that example. So that's where the number comes from. Like I said, I tell farmers, don't worry about it a ton. If you want, there it is. But what you get is a county guarantee, $634.71, and there's a maximum payout of $73.80. Now, how does it work? Suppose the actual 2021 yield for Dane County was low, 165, very unusual for Dane County. And to say, assume the price that year was 375. Did you notice when will we know this 2021 price? Not until August, end of August of 2022, because it takes that long for the marketing year to end. So you can kind of see what's your actual revenue then, 165 times that 375 price, or 618.75. So there's a gap. The low county yield triggered a payment, even though the national price was high. Dane County, for whatever reason, this year has a very low county yield, so it would trigger a payment. 618 and 634, the guarantee is higher than the actual, so that's a $15.96 per acre trigger payment yield, or they call it the ARC payment rate. It's well below the maximum of $73, so you would get the $15.96. So $15.96, you take it times the number of base acres of corn you might have, and take it times 85%. So this example for this farmer, they get a check for $670 and for $678.30. So it's pretty simple. It's just going through the process. It's a guarantee, trigger the payment rate, take it times the base acres, take it times 85%. The same decoupling, well, I'll pause there, but I think it's pretty clear. If anyone has any questions, you can do the chat or you can unmute and talk. But I think it's pretty clear. The problem set has examples just like this, in which you end up working through. The same with the PLC. This is the problem set. Give you some facts about a farm, and then you give some, what they have for base acres and crops and such, and then we have some facts about the marketing year, the crop year, and then you calculate payments if they're due. And that same thing for ARC, or the same thing for PLC, that decoupling applies for ARC as well as it does for PLC. Both of these are that Title I commodity payment program, where notice it's not the actual price you sell the corn for or the soybeans or whatever, it's the national marketing or average price. That's what's used to calculate things. And it's not your actual yield, it's the county average yield. You're going to be correlated with the national price. You're going to be correlated with the county yield, but it's not your yield. You can have a very different yield than the county yield. You can have a very different price than the national marketing average price. And notice also it's using those base acres again. So this farm has 50 corn base acres in this example. we don't know how many acres they actually grew. They probably grew some corn because those base acres were set when they were, the farmers used to grow corn back when those were set. They probably still grow corn, but they might not grow 50 acres. They might have more, they might have less, depending on things. So there's correlation between the base acres and the actual plantings, but you actually don't have to. The whole farm could be in alfalfa or something like that. It has to stay in ag use. It can't be, converted to houses or some other non-agricultural use. And there's a whole list of activities that you can't do on it to, what's defined as an ag use. But that same decoupling applies. So any questions or comments or anything? Otherwise, I'll kind of watch the chat, or you have to unmute, but I think it's pretty clear. Okay, we are in this process now. It started in October, and each year the farmers now have to elect. I have some base acres. I got to go into the FSA office and fill out a form. They went to virtual there during COVID, but you had to choose. I've got this farm. I want to make the decision. Do I want to do ARC or PLC for my corn base acres on this farm? What about the next farm I own? I operate multiple farms. I told the example of the farmer who had 43 FSA farms. So originally it was a 5-year deal. The 2014 Farm Bill, they had ARC and PLC. You had to choose, am I doing ARC or PLC for that crop? All my base acres in that county had to choose one or the other for each crop, and you had to do it for 5 years. Very stressful. Farmers were really, it's just hard to, how do I know what I'm going to want in 2 or 3 years? They want the one that gives them the biggest payouts. Think back, it's 20% of farm income comes from these payments in general. So people are very concerned, found it very stressful. Became an annual election. And so right now, each year I put together a recommendation to Wisconsin farmers of what to do. This year, market prices, expected prices are well above the floor of PLC. And so I would say, don't even bother with PLC for corn and soybeans. Wheat is in the same boat. They're all high. They expect, unless the markets completely fall apart. ARC probably won't pay either because it's very rare that the yields in Wisconsin fall below, especially with this high of prices. You'd have to have a horrible yield in a county when you have way high prices to trigger the payments. And so I'd say, don't sweat it, don't worry about it. But if you have to choose ARC, because if there's a chance your county has a really bad yield, that you might get a payment. But it would be a disaster. Your crop insurance is more important than these programs. I would not worry about these programs. They're not going to help you much this year. But it's a major outreach, especially the first few years when it did matter. So this is the example I have at the bottom, that last bullet. So in October of this year, or right now in November, but in October of 2022, a farmer could receive their ARC or PLC payment for the 2021 crop, if there was one triggered, and at that same time, they could be making their decision for the 2023 crop, what they're going to choose, ARC or PLC. So you can see there's this weird gap in there. I'm getting my check from the 2021 crop, I'm harvesting the 2022 crop, and I'm making a decision about the 2023 crop, all in the same month if you want to. But that's part of this decoupling, and then part of using the national prices and using the marketing year and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a funny lagged system. All right, any questions or comments? Okay, now what this figure here is this is the original 2014 sign up, because everyone had to decide if they were going to do ARC or PLC for the 5 years. And again, there's a major outreach effort in all the states, and I've highlighted the 3 big crops for Wisconsin. Corn, national, these are the national numbers, these aren't Wisconsin, but nationally 95% of farmers signed up for ARC, and that's what we all recommended. A few did PLC for whatever reason. Soybeans, the same thing. Everyone signed up for ARC, which is what we recommended as well. All the economists, you sat and looked at the programs, the prices that were available then. It's like, yes, you want to do ARC. Wheat, it was not as clear a deal, and you had to depend on your county. And so some people took PLC, some people took corn. Nationally, it was about 60% took ARC and 40%. And so you can kind of see it was a big deal. People really freaked out. And there's also this ARC IC, which you haven't talked about yet, this individual program. We'll talk about that a little bit, but you notice a few farmers took that, like chickpeas, the large and small chickpea farmers, there's a lot of them took that. But for corn and soybeans, almost nobody did. A few people did it for wheat. If I remember right, everyone said it was in Washington or Oklahoma was the area that they really used that ARC IC for some reason that year. But basically it was ARC that year with the wheat, a bunch of PLC. Here's the payments that went out in 2014 through 2020. So that's the crop year. The year they were paid would be a year later. And so you can see those are the, this is nationally. Now, these are not the Wisconsin numbers, and those are all dollars and billions. So that very first year, it paid out $3.745 billion for corn. A lot of counties actually maxed out their ARC payments that year. Soybeans paid out a little bit in ARC, 325 million, wheat 353 million. PLC didn't pay. All the prices were high enough. And if you notice on soybean, PLC is never paid in the US. And then you go down the list here, all the other years. You see the next year, 2015, $4 billion for corn, $1 billion for soybean, 640 million for wheat. So these paid out really big those first few years of the program, $3-4 billion nationally for corn, and pretty high, a couple hundred million to $1 billion one year in the soybean. So everyone is very glad they chose ARC. But recently now, market prices have really been high, and so the payments haven't been made. Nationally, PLC didn't pay in corn for the 2020 crop year, but we just finished in 2021. No PLC payments made. Same for soybean. A few were made in wheat, but these are $36 million was paid out in ARC for corn nationally. That's almost nothing. 900. Let's see, get these numbers right. That'd be 9 million for soybeans in ARC. And it's just very few. There's a few counties that had really bad yields. The crop we just finished, the 2021 crop, they made these payments in October of this year, 2022. PLC, none were paid for corn and soybeans or wheat. And county ARC, very few counties, again, in a few states triggered county ARC payments. It's essentially that bottom row again, just a few $1 million are paid out in all for corn, soybeans, and wheat. Here's the payments. Look, if you like, instead of looking at tables, you like to see the same data but expressed in visually. But you can see how big those payments in ARC were the first few years for corn. PLC paid out pretty good in wheat several times. So people were glad they chose that. Here's the Wisconsin data here. I wasn't able to get the last few years because there just really hasn't been much for payments. But 2014, we had like 228 million of ARC payments went out in the state of Wisconsin. 380 million over the 6-year period here. But you see 2016 was another year. 2020 had 2021, I should say, paid out a little bit for the 2020 crop. And so and mostly it was wheat PLC in the state. So these have really diminished. There's all those other programs we'll talk about, but in the early years, these programs are hugely popular and paid out a lot of money. More recently, markets are high, so there's no payments, and only in very special cases. So here's the map of it all. This is the 2014 year. We had that big $3.75 billion paid out. The darker the color, the bigger the payments. This would be dollars per base acre. You can see Wisconsin, there's a big green chunk along the river, and then southwestern Wisconsin and around the central part of the state with the pole and the central sands. That was in that $60 to $75 range, or the $45 to $60 range. That's corn, but you can see those some really black areas out west. There's not a lot of base acres out there, but they did get high payments. The same in places like up the Panhandle of Texas, or and the parts of New Mexico and such. But you see the big band. Their yields are low in those areas. The county yields are down. It was a drier year. Same thing here. This is 2019, just to show you the variation and for across years. Map looks completely different. The yellow is 0, so tons of counties received no payments, but a whole different set of counties got ARC county payments in 2019. So you can see there are only 190 million were paid out, but up in the north and north central part of, or northeastern part of Wisconsin, there were some counties that received ARC payments for corn. Same map. This is the back to 2014 for soybeans. Now, not a lot was paid out, 325 million, but a big chunk of counties in Wisconsin did receive payments up there in the northern sections of the northeastern part of the state. See pockets in other places too, like Nebraska paid out a bunch, parts of Iowa and parts of Minnesota, and then out in the northeast. So that's what the real point you emphasize with farmers and stuff like this is these ARC payments can get very large when there's a low price and or low county yield, and there's a lot of variation across counties. And so if you're farming in multiple counties, or you talk to people, or you're on a border and you know people on both sides, you can get a big payment and your neighbor gets nothing, or vice versa. So you have to be ready for that variation in payments. You can see here, like these here counties here, these yellow ones got nothing, and then county just north of it, got $25 a base acre. And so it's it's kind of weird, but that's how the program works. So county ARC payments vary by county and year. You need low county yield and or low national price. It creates a revenue insurance really at the 86% coverage level. We'll talk about crop insurance in the next section after the next week, but it's very much like a crop insurance program, but it uses different averages and stuff. It uses 5-year Olympic average of prices and yields, not what the crop. We'll find out what crop insurance uses. Uses that national marketing price, not the actual price you receive. Uses county average yield, not your actual yield. So pause for any questions or comments or anything there. But that's kind of just the process is how it works, and then sort of it does matter a lot, and when there's prices are low or there's low yields. I haven't said much about ARC IC. It's only was popular in 1 year in 2019 because we had a lot of it was a chance to make some extra payments those years, the way that the rules are set up. So some people did it, but we're talking 5-6%. I'll have the numbers in a minute here. What you do in ARC IC, it's an individual coverage. You get to use your actual yields, but you have to do all your crops. It's an individual revenue guarantee for all your program crops as a whole for an FSA farm. You don't do crop by crop, so you have to combine your corn, soybeans, and wheat all into one whole farm, if you will, individual coverage. But it's still this benchmarking, Olympic averaging. The benchmark revenue for your by crop is still the 5-year Olympic average of your yields per planted acre now, not the county, but they still use that national price. They still put the 370 floor on corn, the 840 floor on soybeans. But what you do is you get an individual benchmark revenue. It's the percent of your acres or the proportion of your acres that are corn that you actually planted, times your corn benchmark revenue, your actual percent of soybean acres planted times your soy benchmark revenue. That becomes your county, your individual guarantee, 86% of that. And so what's different about it is it's two things. One, it's using your yield history, not the county yield history. And two, it combines all your crops into one sort of farm guarantee, not a individual crop by crop guarantee. So payment rate, the calculations are all the same again, except, and this is the big kicker, it's 65% of your base acres times your payment rate. So if you get a farm guarantee, if your yields go below that guarantee, you get payments, but it's the same maximum up to 10% of the county benchmark and stuff. You don't get any extra. But instead of 85% times your base acres times that individual payment rate, you get 65%. So there's a much higher deductible, if you want to think of it that way. Think of it as an insurance program, but instead of a 15% deductible, you have a really big deductible, 35%. And that's why a lot of people don't choose ARC IC. That's just too big. You have to have a big revenue shortfall before it really starts kicking in. But it's tied to your actual production. It's your corn production, how many bushels you actually produce, and your total planted acres matter. Not your base acres, but your planted acres. Base acres are used to calculate your payment here, like you do with all the other ARC and PLC, but the payment rate is based off of your acres planted and your yields. So it's out there. We had to do some outreach for it 1 year because everyone got excited about it, but you can see nationally, it still was about 6% in this year with really high ARC IC use. It just made sense that 1 year because the way they treated prevented plant. 2019 was a very wet year in big chunks of the country, and there's a lot of acres that were not able to be planted. It's called prevented planting acres, and a lot of farms with that, the way that this program, the ARC IC, treated prevented planting, it actually made it valuable to sign up for ARC IC. So 6% of the country did it for corn and soybeans. I'm not going to ask you about ARC IC, but if you hear it, that's what it is. So the only thing left I'd like to cover is who gets these payments, and then we'll be done. The one thing about these virtual classes is they go a lot faster. We don't talk to each other, they're more boring, but we'll get through the material faster. So it's hard to say, because one thing you kind of get there's a stereotype about farm programs, all the big farmers get the money, or all the small farmers do, or however stereotype you want to think about it. what I always like to put data to these kind of things is just sort of get a sense, and that's kind of my job. I'm a professor. And so the in the ag census every 5 years that you can get a sense of where the government payments go. And so this is from the most recent census of ag, the 2017, and this is just Wisconsin. And so the first column is that they categorize farms by the amount of revenue, of farm revenue they sell. So like how many farms, some of the farms had less than $5,000 worth of ag revenue, like they sold a few cattle or they had some small acreage of corn or something. And then you can see all the rest of them there, 5 to 9, 10,000, 10 to 25, et cetera, all the way down to, all the way down to 5 million or more. And that's the categories that USDA uses. And the next column is the percent of farms in that category. So you can see how many farms were there? There were 64,793 in Wisconsin. 37% of them, you can do the math, actually had farm sales less than 5,000. So a big chunk of these little farms had hardly anything. And then you can see the next one is 10%, 12, and it just keeps going down, 8%, 8.7, 11. So there's a bunch in this area that goes up a little bit and then it starts to fall. 6.739, et cetera. So over $5 million in sales, only 0.4% of the farms in the state had that. The next one is percent of sales. That's the percent of farms, now the percent of sales. So yeah, there's 37% of the farms are in that small category of less than 5,000 in sales, hardly anything. They're only 0.2% of the total sales revenue. And so you can see this is going to go the other way. The large farms are going to generate a large chunk of the sales revenue. But there are not very many of those farms. So you can see as it climbs, so we'll do the, $100,000, $250,000 of revenue, 11% of the farms, they generate about 10% of sales. But then you get to those bigger ones, we'll take the over 5 million, 0.4% of the farms, 22% of the sales. Now you have the payments here, and that's the same, what these are, the percent of the payments. This would be the percentage of the dollars. And so if there's $100 billion paid out, well, 6.5% goes to that less than 5,000. 4.9, et cetera. And so now you get the percent of payments. And then the last one is we know what percent of the, what number of farms receive these payments, participate in the program. And these are the participation rate. So we're going to do that first row and then we'll go. So $5,000 or less in sales, 37% of the farms, they only generate 0.2% of the sales. That group as a whole received 6.5% of the money. And only 22% of people in that category participated in these farm programs. 78% of the farmers in that category got nothing. They didn't participate in these ARC and PLC type of things. So you can kind of see how this works out. There's just tons of information here. You can kind of get the trends. As you go up to this mid-sized farm with the highest participation rates, 80, 82% in that 500 to 5 million, the really large farms actually starts to go down. And they do get a chunk of the say of the 14, 13, 15 are in this category, 100 to $2.5 million. That's the heart of the program right there. They generate about 10 to 20% of the sales. So there's 20, 35, 45, 55. There's 58% of the sales in these 4 categories. They receive, about 60%, or not quite, say 55% of the payments, and about 2/3 to 80% of them participate in the program. And you just do that. I took the 250 cut because that's kind of my thinking of it. That's a group that's a full-time farmer is above 250,000 in revenue. And so you can see these numbers. 86% of the farms are less than 250. They receive 16% or generate 16% of the sales, and we receive half of the payments roughly. But there's a lot of people who don't participate. About only 1/3 of them participate. Then you go to larger farms over $250,000. 14% of the farms, 84% of the sales in the state. They also get about half of the payments, 52%, and most of them participate, almost 3/4 of them do. So you get a sense of how this works. This would include ARC and PLC and other commodity support programs like disaster aid, which we haven't talked about, as well as conservation programs for like CRP and stuff like that. We don't really talk much about those. It does not include crop insurance subsidies, but the small farms make up, we've already done these numbers, you can look at them again. The thing is you got to remember from that one presentation we did a while back, many of these farms are actually retired or have a different job besides that smaller, less than 250,000. So they're not full-time farmers. They're either retired, a big chunk of them are, or they have some other job. The commercial farms, I'll say at least 250,000 and up. There are not very many of them in the state relative to these smaller operations that have other jobs and such. They generate a ton of the sales, these larger farms, and they receive about half the payments. So you kind of see half the payments go to this small operations, the other half goes to the bigger ones. And the bigger operations are more likely to participate, but there's still a lot of people who don't participate in these programs. Even the large farm, it's the max, it's 73%. You saw the maximum was about 81, 82% participation. So there's a lot of people who don't even get any of these payments. It's because they don't want them, or more likely is their farm doesn't have any base acres. That's what it most likely boils down to, because somebody back in the 80s did not enroll the land in the farm program in those years, and then now they farm that land.